shit. I'm excited for this. This is the thing that I'm excited for. Ain't Raymu your Kinko? Raymu. Who? Which one? I don't know who that is, to be honest. Anyways, speaking of which, I want to see what this The truth is far worse than we imagined for Ashes of Creations. Investors have exposed the Ashes of Creation fraud and Stephen Sheriff's evil scams. Lawsuit is imminent. Ooh, I'm super excited. I gotta see this.
So just about everyone knew that something was very amiss with Ashes of Creation after it collapsed alongside its studio just 2 weeks after launch.
I don't know Raymu that much.
And now we're starting to get reports and testimonials from investors involved. And if all of that information is true, this is all far worse than we could have possibly imagined. So
well. Who would have thought that Ashes of Creation was gonna be a scam? Even I fucking knew, to be honest.
I'm gonna give you the TLDR
if it
versions
isn't
right
another
here,
goddamn
summarized by a
MMO
couple
scamming
individuals.
people.
Jay Oddity tweeted the following recently: Ashes of Creation drama goes nuclear as the new owners sue Stephen J. Sheriff.
Damn.
In the lawsuit, they claim Stephen was, and for those who don't know, Stephen Sheriff is the creative director of Ashes of Creation and the individual who spearheaded the entire project. The lawsuit claims that Stephen was effectively embezzling funds, taking money from investors for his own use.
That's crazy.
Mixing business and personal funds. Bought a property with Intrepid's funds, but when sold, personally kept the money. Used loans as revenue to get bigger loans. This is all obviously just allegations at the moment and are not proven. The lawsuit is TFE Game Holdings versus Stephen J. Sheriff and John Moore. Another bombshell happened.
Even I can tell you this thing. Roach King told me otherwise. I trusted him. Man, that guy can't even trust the fucking rat in his room if that shit bit him on the ass, to be honest. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm gonna call out Asmongold, to be honest, with his shenanigans, saying that this is gonna be a great game, which it wasn't to begin with. Asmon needs to gift that CC that made the early warning his flowers. True. Because I'm gonna be honest with you, even I can tell this shit was smelling pretty off. I'm not gonna lie, because you want to know something? There was a specific era in time, a couple years back or so, where literally MMOs were getting scammed or so, and games were getting scammed by people through Kickstarters and everything. So this just had the same formula as all the other ones in the past. So nothing really changes. It's just people are pretty dumb and retarded and forgot about that specific era. Also, another thing too as well, that logo, that specific logo there, it doesn't match or anything like that. So, you know, usually when you're drawing or something, most new MMOs are not successful. Even then, at the end of the day, this MMO is a scam and a half. You told me specifically that you had to pay to get into this game, but it's not even in beta. It's an alpha. If that doesn't show red flags immediately, I don't know what does. Number two, like I said specifically, this little freaking phoenix here. When you're usually making a logo or so, you usually make it match. You mirror match it. This doesn't mirror match whatsoever. So this probably was created with AI anyway. So I'm just saying.
When an Ashes of Creation investor, Jason Karamanis, spoke with YouTuber NefisQS. He appeared to share private texts and conversations surrounding the game. The texts appear to show many years of Steven and Jason talking with Steven, appearing to somewhat love bomb Jason when asking for investment. We await Steven's side of the story, but this all seems incredibly messy at the moment. One investor is said to have lost upwards of $90 million.
Jesus.
And then here's another one that is a little longer, but provides even more details about what we're learning based on recent reports. Okay, says One Peg, let me get this straight. Ashes of Creation former CEO Stephen Sheriff bankrupted the company on purpose after 10 years having not put a single dollar into his company. One of the claims to
Oh
fame
my
for Ashes of
God.
Creation is the fact that, according to Steven Sheriff back then, it was solely being funded by Kickstarter and him and his own personal funds. As it turns out, based on what investors are saying, none of that would turn out to be true, looking at all the financial information that's been leaked. The tweet continues.
Well. And the more shit keeps on revealing itself, the more shit I keep smiling and laughing. Just gotta say, well, if it isn't another MMO scam. All right, Mr. Roach King. It looks like we're gonna have to take away your gamer score credit downwards. Now at this point, you do not represent for the gamers, okay? Because remember, at the end of the day, he does say that he represents the average gamer. Defending Ashes of Creation and what you did specifically in that video a year ago definitely doesn't look very good, to be honest.
Continues, Ashes of Creation was spending $2.5 million per month in burn in 2025, and $1 million per year was salaries to himself and his husband throughout the duration of the project.
So wait, what? To he himself and his husband? Damn, dude. They just got finessed by two gay guys.
But he wasn't keeping up with his mortgage on his home and was at risk of having the bank foreclose on his house. And it wasn't just any old regular house, it was a freaking mansion. And almost losing his house, Steven begged his two primary investors for money to secure a loan that he couldn't pay and put $1.3 million into an escrow account for his home loan. When Ashes of Creation's track record of insolvency wasn't improving, insolvency meaning its inability to pay a debt, the primary investor of Intrepid, who paid $80 million, said he was taking over and tried to make Steven the creative director with an earn-out plan. They were to lay off 50 to 70% of the staff, but at least save the game and business. Steven refused. When negotiations failed, Steven notified the bank holding his home loan of the incoming Steam funds from the early access launch and instructed them to write a letter to Valve claiming the $3.7 million of sales money. This did three things. Number one, it technically fulfilled the obligation of launching the game to backers. Referring to this promise in the Kickstarter campaign, in the case that Ashes of Creation does not launch, we promise to refund all backers in full. And the promise was that Steven Sheriff had personal funds aside specifically meant to refund Kickstarter backers in case Ashes of Creation does not launch. It technically did launch now in early access in a...
Well, if that didn't show a red flag or so, I don't know what will. Well, the scams just keep on scamming and you can see it all in gloriness, to be honest. Interesting.
Hopefully unfinished state, so he can now say that this promise was technically fulfilled. Steven can now say he doesn't owe anyone refunds because the game did launch, which puts the early access launch in a negative light. It doesn't seem like it was about trying to release a version of the game that was still viable and get feedback from users. It felt like the early access was rushed out to fulfill this promise amidst this entire situation of Steven Sheriff seemingly scamming the community as well as the investors involved in Ashes of Creation and also the developers he hired to work on this game who poured their hearts into it. So that's one of the things Steven's alleged deception did. Number two, securing the funds released the $1.3 million from escrow of personal money that the bank was holding to secure his home loan. And then number three, if this part's true, like this is just evil shit. That money was intended to pay payroll on February 1st. When the money vaporized due to the bank's claim they had no choice but to close the business and send out warn notifications, that's why it came so late. Steven's unethical board, referring to the statement he released after everything collapsed, or he talked about how he resigned because of an unethical board and how he disagreed with their decisions, was him refusing to take a step away from the control seat. The letter to the bank bankrupted the company. Stephen Sheriff literally caused Intrepid Studios and Ashes of Creation to burn by his own hand and walked away from the business with literal millions of dollars in his bank account.
That is
fuck.
freaking
If you would like the
wild.
full story in complete detail, then you owe it to yourself to watch Nefes QS's videos here.
So the investor claims Steffens and his husband embezzled millions to fund party life. It's a 1-hour video, dude. Holy shit, dude. That's crazy.
There were 2 of them that he released. One of them titled, Investor Claims Stephen and His Husband Embezzled Millions to Fund Party Life. And the second video right here is titled, Stephen Sheriff's Worst Nightmare Comes True. The first video is 1 hour and 19 minutes and 41 seconds long. The second one is 1 hour and 43 minutes and 57 minutes long. Yeah, there's a lot of information to go through, but what these videos do is not only highlight the individuals who are accusing Stephen Sheriff of essentially fraud, in particular one investor who decided to leak all this information to provide evidence. These videos also present the actual receipts to ensure that, these claims aren't unsubstantiated. The description of these videos, the first one here reads, exclusive Bombshell report. I've obtained private legal and financial documents from a primary Ashes of Creation investor who I met with through video calls and emails after confirming their identity. The documents detail a debt of over $150 million with over 380 pages of text messages exchanged between Stephen Sheriff and the investor that gives us a better timeline of what may have happened behind the scenes at Intrepid Studios from 2014, 3 years before the Kickstarter even launched, to 2026. In the second video, that's 1 hour and 43 minutes and 57 seconds long, Jason speaks directly with Nefes QS. The second video right here is actually
Nah, I'm gonna do your mom is what I'm gonna do every single night when you invest in me.
a direct interview with Jason Karamenis, and this video's description reads, after obtaining private legal and financial documents from a primary Ashes of Creation investor, he calls us while we're live streaming to give us further details on how Stephen Sheriff, CEO of Intrepid Studios, stole the payroll from employees. He also details how Stephen actually, quote-unquote, resigned and answers people's question.
Yo, that's some shitty scummy thing. They stole the paychecks off of their employees. Are you serious? So none of them even got paid. Holy cow, dude, that's crazy.
If you want the most detailed summary and account of these 2 videos, WCCF Tech here did a tremendous job with the following article titled Ashes of Creation Investor Alleges Founder Orchestrated a $140 million fraud. And scrolling down here, you can see that this article kind of presents the entire timeline in full detail. All of the investors involved, all of the investors who felt like they were screwed over, all of Stephen Sheriff's actions that resulted in the downfall, in the collapse of Ashes of Creation, as well as Intrepid Studios as a whole, his selfish actions, his manipulations, and straight up, him stealing money and engaging in what looks to be almost like embezzlement, as well as straight up running with money invested by investors who believed in Stephen Sheriff's promise in an MMORPG.
I heard it was worse, but I didn't know it was this bad, to be honest. Jesus fucking damn, dude. This might be, throughout all the history of scams of like MMOs and shit like that in the past, I think this might be the biggest one, to be honest, so far.
Project that would redefine the genre, that would garner a huge fan base, and that would make these investors a lot of money. It's also worth noting that all this completely contradicts what Stephen Sheriff has consistently touted throughout the years of Ashes of Creation's development, which was that it was completely self-funded, and that, according to this statement right here, directly from Stephen, we aren't governed by greedy corporate overlords. I'm funding the project, so no investors or a board to answer to, no publishers to appease. We speak with, not to, our community, and we actually listen to feedback and value and respect our players. As it turns out, there were, in fact, investors. There was some kind of board to answer to, and that would be these investors that Stephen kind of dragged by the nose for the longest time before jumping ship when Stephen himself allegedly sunk the ship in order to be able to get away with millions in money. And Steven claims right here, I'm funding the project. And this isn't the only time Steven claimed this. He very publicly stated so via the following interview from July 18th, 2018 with news outlet PC Games N. When asked about how this game is being funded, he straight up said that the vast majority of the project has been paid for personally by the CEO. But based on what investors' testimonials and documentations reveal, he didn't put a single penny personally into this project.
Of course
that
he didn't.
apparently was a complete and utter lie. People believed in Steven Sheriff because he was involved with this company called Zango, who engages in multi-level marketing. Apparently he made millions off of that. And one of the biggest concerns surrounding this project was the fact that the creative director was involved in multi-level marketing, which is often considered to be a really controversial way of doing business. It's seen as basically pyramid scheme-esque. It is deemed to be in many ways like a scam, or at least a very like scummy and manipulative and deceptive way of doing business. So
Well. If there's a more scam showing out in the open, goddamn, dude.
that history alone kind of cropping up early on when the Kickstarter campaign launched gave people a lot of pause and made people very suspicious about this project. And the
Rightfully
funny part
so.
about all this is that PC Gamer called it all the way back in June of 2017 in this article titled, "There's Something Strange About Kickstarter's Most Successful MMO." This was
So if there was an article back in 2017 that literally said there's some suspiciousness about this MMO specifically, where are those red flags in your head that should be alerting you? Be like, I'll wait about this game. At least now people are learning now, at least. You gotta learn the hard way sometimes, you know?
was after Ashes of Creation's Kickstarter campaign launched on May 1st, 2017, and after it became the most successful Kickstarter MMO, with a campaign having earned over $3.2 million from almost 20,000 backers, and would also earn more money thereafter. Among the things that PC Gamer highlighted was the fact that Steven Sheriff was involved with multi-level marketing, and PC Gamer aptly highlights here that the multi-level marketing industry is one embroiled in controversy and skepticism. Around this time, Steven Sheriff was also asked, why turn to Kickstarter if you're so rich that you can fund this MMO yourself? To which he said that Kickstarter is a very small supplemental source to increase the scope of our project and hire additional personnel. Except Steven Sheriff, based on recent documentation and based on recent testimonials, never had any intention of investing a single cent of his own personal funds into the project. So with all that context, what this Kickstarter looks like is just a means to earn more money, to scam people out of money. PC Gamer back then also raised suspicions surrounding the promise that if Ashes of Creation doesn't launch, then Steven Sheriff would refund every donation in full. PC Gamer understandably expressed that they were skeptical of such a claim, seeing as that Kickstarter money would already be spent on salaries and development by the time the game failed. But what Steven Sheriff claimed at the time is that the entirety of the budget comes from my personal funding, the entirety of the budget for refunds, stating that those reserves are available to refund the people who pledged towards it. Basically insinuating that Steven Sheriff would personally refund all Kickstarter backers if Ashes of Creation fails. And if all of this is to be
That's such a sus. That's so sus. I'm not gonna lie, that is the most sussest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. There really is not a lot of money to make that kind of MMO they promised. Even that can tell you that's an obvious scam.
believe, then we know for sure that the reason the early access came out the way it did in the completely woefully unfinished state that it did wasn't because he wanted to get feedback from players. This was just a rushed out product to fulfill that promise so that Steven Sheriff would not have to live up to that promise of refunding everyone. The early access
That's
currently seems like it was
crazy.
just a means to avoid having to pay people from his own personal funds as he originally promised. And then there's the controversial referral program that Ashes of Creation engaged in way back then that basically gave individuals referral codes, and if they were able to invite other people to fund Ashes of Creation, it would earn the referrer 15% of that value back as premium credits or actual cash when the game is live, which basically actively incentivize people to hype up and spread word about a game that doesn't even exist yet. And all this, by the way, was against Kickstarter's own policies, with Kickstarter, after having been reached out to by PC gamers, stating that we do not allow revenue or profit sharing. And all of this felt very reminiscent of Stephen Sheriff's multi-level marketing background. And with all these reports, testimonials, and documentation coming out from investors who felt like they were scammed, this PC Gamer article now looks incredibly prophetic. If all these claims are true, then it would seem as though every red flag that people brought up and that brought a lot of suspicions.
Wait a minute. So this was back in 2017, right? Can I see something real quick? Hold on, let me see. Can I see real fast? Hold on. 2017, right? Because this was the guy, right? This was the guy that made content specifically on like MMOs, right? Like the old MMOs specifically. Let me see. Oh yeah, here it is. Here it all is right here specifically. He made some MMOs, especially Dream World. Dream World was one of the biggest scams back then, if you guys don't remember specifically. So this was 4 years ago. (2021) 2017. And I know there was other specific scams too as well. Yeah, and they got Lazy Pawn as well is the one that also specifically did that too. Yep. Yep. So okay, so then this specific MMO was actually during it might be a little bit more earlier though. It's definitely a lot more earlier. Was the pioneer of scamming people compared to these other MMOs too as well. Yeah, this is definitely like it was during the early days or so of the MMO scams. Even I could have told you, if I would have saw the trailer back then and all this other shit, I would have told you that this was literally a scam, you know? He got scamming portfolios and everyone missed that? Yep. Yep. Everyone missed it. Yep. That's all I gotta say.
Surrounding this entire project were incredibly warranted. Many people fear that Stephen Sheriff was actually a huge scammer based on his multi-level marketing background, and based on these recent reports, if true, it seemed as though there's a good reason why he succeeded in the multi-level marketing business. It may very well be that for Stephen Sheriff, this entire thing was basically a long con. And I mean, when you look at all the contradictions, the fact that there are these major investors at all, when Stephen Sheriff consistently stated that there are no investors in this project whatsoever, that there's complete autonomy here, that Stephen Sheriff himself is funding this project, when there's evidence potentially that Stephen Sheriff did not invest a single dollar into this project, that alone already casts an incredibly suspicious light on Stephen Sheriff. But then investors being as adamant as they are and presenting all of the documentation and all of the messages, the text messages that they exchanged, and all of it highlighting like seemingly very clear evidence of full-on like fraud, one of the biggest and most egregious cases of fraud in gaming history. Yeah, none of this looks good for Stephen Sheriff.
Yeah,
we still have to hear Stephen Sheriff's side of the story to get the full picture, but it's hard to know if his...
True. They said something is coming out for Star Citizen. I don't know how true that is, but I feel like Star Citizen is also the longest questionable game, in my personal opinion.
board can be trusted, or if he can provide documentation himself to contradict what investors are presenting. But again, the existence of these investors at all already makes Stephen Sheriff look like he cannot be trusted, because it means he practically completely lied to the community and to the public and to journalists. From the May 1st, 2017 Kickstarter campaign launch, it would take almost 9 years to launch the early access version of Ashes of Creation, which would release on December 11th, 2025 for $50 that a lot of people paid for. You can see right here, based on recent developments, recent reviews have turned overwhelmingly negative with the collapse of the game, with the collapse of the studio, and with all of this seemingly looking like one giant long con. At one point, amidst the collapse of the studio and the game, Stephen tried to present himself as a victim, and all of this putting out the following statement back in, January 31st, 2026. I can make a limited statement in my personal capacity and not on behalf of the company regarding the situation. Control of the company shifted away from me, and the board began directing actions that I could not ethically agree with or carry out. As a result, I chose to resign and protest rather than lend my name or authority to decisions I could not ethically support. Following my resignation, much of the senior leadership team resigned. Following those departures, the board made the decision to issue Warrant Act notices and proceed with a mass layoff. I cannot responsibly speak to further details at this time due to ongoing legal and governance matters. What I can say is that the developers and staff acted in good faith and deserve better than the uncertainty they're now facing. I'm incredibly dismayed by the situation, claims Stephen Sheriff. But all of this is cast under an immense amount of suspicion, and there's suddenly a new perspective we can look at this statement with if we consider all the claims and all the accusations against Stephen Sheriff. So now we know that the board is actually the investors who were deeply involved in Ashes of Creation. Despite the fact that Stephen consistently claimed that there is no board of directors, there are no investors. Resigning in protest to decisions that he could not ethically support, it seems as though that's related to investors finally putting their foot down and forcing Stephen Sheriff to make decisions to save the game and the business. It reads right here, by January 2026, Robert Dawson had reached his breaking point. Having invested $80 million with no return and facing continued operational losses, he initiated what Karamanis describes as a reasonable restructuring plan. The proposal called for a 60 to 70% staff layoffs to make the company financially sustainable, a new funding round requiring all existing investors to contribute 25% of their previous investment to maintain equity, and a new role for Sheriff as creative director with earnout-based equity tied to company performance rather than immediate ownership. This is what Stephen Sheriff protested, what he couldn't ethically agree to, which is why Stephen Sheriff flat out refused. Karamanis revealed that he demanded immediate equity despite having contributed no capital. When negotiations failed, Sheriff allegedly took action that would destroy the company entirely. And that's when he decided to resign outright. Between approximately January 26th and January 31st, Sheriff resigned as creative director and executed what Karamanis called an act of sabotage. He had Commerce Bank send a letter to Valve claiming the Steam revenue from the December early access launch, approximately $3.7 million that had been earmarked for the February 1st payroll. This money was instead used to pay off Commerce Bank's loan secured by Sheriff's house or Sheriff's mansion, releasing $1.5 to $1.6 million in escrow to him personally. The seizure of funds left the company unable to make payroll and effectively bankrupted it. Karamanis portrays Stephen's seizure of the Steam revenue as a deliberate act of sabotage, thus destroying the company rather than accepting the performance-based compensation proposed by main investor Robert Dawson. He basically stole money from the company that was meant to be used for payroll and paid off his mansion instead. That's the accusation right here. And again, if true, holy fucking shit. And not to mention that he preferred to destroy the company, to destroy the game and the community instead of accepting a performance-based compensation method proposed by Robert Dawson. Because then he'd actually be held responsible and liable, and he couldn't just use company funds willy-nilly, he couldn't just extract money how he wanted. That's why he destroyed everything. For money. And if you saw my previous reportings on this whole situation, you will know that the Warren Act letter indicated that recent payroll period cannot be met by Intrepid Studios. And allegedly, it wasn't because Stephen Sheriff didn't have the means to actually pay payroll. It was because he decided to use that money for his own purposes, for his own personal needs, to pay off his own personal mansion. But yeah, I mean, I would highly recommend reading through this entire article to get the full timeline of events, to get the real specifics.
What a fucking wild timeline I'm hearing, to be honest. This shit was a scam, dude. I think this was probably the first scam back during the MMO scam era on Kickstarter.
Including all of the investors and parties involved who felt like they were frauded. Now, it's worth highlighting that a lot of the people that Stephen Sheriff received investment fund were themselves multi-level marketing entrepreneurs. Jason Karamanis himself is a 57-year-old multi-level marketing entrepreneur who made his fortune primarily through Junice Global, a Florida-based anti-aging skincare and supplements multi-level marketing company where he achieved the rank of Imperial Diamond Director. Ugh. And alongside that, he also joined other multi-level marketing companies over the years, and in the video acknowledges being at the top of the pyramids. Like, yeah, MLM is practically another form of pyramid scheme. And with Karamanis in particular, he apparently invested, or rather lost now, $12.5 million of his own money by investing in Ashes of Creation and believing in Sheriff's empty promises. And Stephen Sheriff himself not only never invested a single penny into Intrepid Studios, despite publicly claiming having contributed between $30 to $60 million over the years, but beyond that, he actually took money from the company, with him and his partner John Moore consistently and systematically having withdrawn $500,000 per year in salary payments. As a couple, Stephen Sheriff and John Moore took $1 million a year from the company and just gave it to themselves. The article further details here that while the public report suggested the company had raised between $109 million and $115 million, Karamanis claims that the actual figure approaches $140 million when accounting for Kickstarter funds, Commerce Bank loans, PPP loans, and various private investments, all of whom were completely screwed over and blindsided by this. This is a $140 million fraud
God,
case if all of these accusations turn out to be true. Now, another investor is Tom Alkazin.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if it is actually true, to be honest. At the end of the day, like I said specifically, this MMO came from the era of the era of all MMO Kickstarter scams.
Who invested $2 million, much of it which was earned through MLM or multi-level marketing. So Stephen Sheriff got a lot of his multi-level marketing folks and people who got rich off of that to invest in his seemingly scheme. Apparently at one point, this investor, Alkazin, settled with the Federal Trade Commission to pay $1.2 million, with a larger judgment of over $6.7 million partially suspended, alongside a forfeiture of 1.61 acres in San Marcos, California. Alkazin was also permanently banned from engaging in pyramid schemes and any future multi-level marketing activities. So it seemed as though Alkazin himself was found guilty of basically being a schemer, like a con artist, basically. Again, it just feels like Stephen Sheriff was like the ultimate con artist and took advantage of other con artists. But yeah, apparently the $2 million that Tom Alkazin invested, a 70-something family friend, apparently that was basically the life savings of Tom Alkazin and his wife. So even among schemers and con artists, it seemed as though Stephen Sheriff is like a level above, just far more ruthless than the rest of them. Now,
So this guy is the evil master genius mastermind who convoluted this entire scheme just to pay off for his goddamn mansion, dude. What a truly evil person, to be honest. if this is all true, but I don't know, man. It seems to be kind of true. Not gonna lie, to be honest. Holy shit, dude.
Single largest victim is this individual who I spoke about before, Robert Dawson, who invested approximately $80 million of his own capital into the failing company, a wealthy investor whom Karamanis introduced to Sheriff several years ago in Las Vegas. So that's potentially $80 million down the drain as a result of Stephen Sheriff's actions, which, based on reports, seem to have been very calculated and intentional in many regards. But yeah, there's talks here about Sheriff allegedly refusing to provide books and records, tax returns, or QuickBooks files for 9 years, which is indeed very suspicious. How he never attended or called for a single board meeting. There's information here about Stephen Sheriff allegedly purchasing a mansion, and in 2024, when the original owner's mortgage came due, that was like a crisis point, and so he turned to his investors once more to basically bail him out of his debt. All the while, in 2025, Intrepid Studios was hemorrhaging cash because operating expenses were at a whopping $2.5 million per month, and the game was only making $150,000 to $200,000 per month after it launched. So that's a monthly loss of around $2.3 million per month. Just a ridiculous burn rate. Even Dawson's massive capital infusions couldn't sustain the operation indefinitely because of how fast the burn rate was. The end result is investors talking about how there's all this money that was lost that they'll never get back, with some folks like Alcazin losing their entire life savings, with Karamanis admitting that he's cried himself at night alongside Dawson because of the sheer amount of money that they lost and how betrayed they felt. But personally, the people I most feel for are the Kickstarter backers who invested not only money, but also their time and their emotional investment. And I also feel bad for the developers who genuinely believed in this project and who did their best to work under the circumstances that they were given.
It does kind of suck at the end of the day that these people invested onto this game. But if all the red flags were showing before, there was a lot of warning signs about the game in general. Well, do I need to say more?
Only for them to be laid off and also not be paid for their work, with a former developer here highlighting how none of the people who were laid off are receiving our final paychecks, the 60 days notice and pay outlined under the WARN Act, PTO payouts or paid time off payouts, or other compensation owed. They were especially screwed over. They were made to believe in the—
No, it's not just that. Everything back in 2017, there was already warning flags about this game. 2017, they fucking announced some suspiciousness about this. I'm just saying, this shit kicks back all the way to 2017.
Stream, only for the rug to be pulled from under them, and underneath it all seemingly was just pure deception and complete fraud and malfeasance. As for what the future holds, well, it should come as no surprise that multiple lawsuits are reportedly imminent, with involved parties including TFE Games, which invested $5 million, Commerce Bank, which Karamanis claims was defrauded with false revenue reports, and numerous other investors, with claims that Karamanis alleges that Sheriff committed federal crimes by booking investor loans as revenue on tax returns. Karamanis went as far as to say that there is nothing I'm saying that is slanderous or libelous about Stephen, which is why he's presenting all of the documentation and evidence that he is. Karamanis claims he's a pathological nutcase liar, and guess what? You're going to see numerous lawsuits come out against him for fraud or whatever else. All of this is going to come out in litigation. Karamanis also says that people should look up what narcissistic personality disorder is, because apparently it describes Stephen Sheriff to a T. He's the most narcissistic tool I've ever met in my entire life, says Karamanis. As for Ashes of Creation itself, apparently Robert Dawson now controls the Ashes of Creation intellectual property, the investor who put in $80 million into this project. And apparently Dawson is exploring options to continue developing Ashes of Creation, but understandably, key technical staff allegedly refused to communicate with him, having been poisoned against investors by Sheriff, claimed Karamanis. Yeah, I mean, the people involved are also multi-level marketers and rich people who you cannot really trust. They're in it for the money. So it's hard for developers to put their trust in this project ever again. How could they? And with all the negative press surrounding it, there's absolutely no way anyone will want to touch this. I think there is no future for Ashes of Creation personally. I would also recommend checking out this article right here by massively.overpowered.com or massivelyop.com that provides a summary of the first video that Nephis QS published. It adds further context about this other investor, this Chinese company, iDream Sky, which was meant to invest $60 million over 5 years with a 35% revenue share in 2019, but then out of the blue, they just kind of pulled out, and it allegedly put Karamanis himself into debt and had sheriffs scrambling to even fund payroll.
Hey man, good thing they pulled out or so, because holy shit, did they save that money for something else, to be honest. Oh man, oh man. They were smart. They were smart not investing their money on that.
For developers for multiple months. The debt accrued by Intrepid totals over $105 million, though, as previously reported, Karamanis says it's closer to $140 million. But yeah, I'm just going to leave it there, folks. I could literally sit here and detail all of this for hours. But again, if you want all of the nitty-gritty details, go to these two videos by Nephis QS, 1 and 2, and also look at these two articles right here, this one from Massively Overpowered and this one from WCCF Tech, all of which I will link in the description section below. In the meantime, though, I'd love to hear what your thoughts and opinions are on this whole situation. I think this is one of the most insane, one of the most egregious cases of fraud, if not the most egregious case of fraud I've ever witnessed in my time covering video games. That is, of course, assuming any of this is true. We haven't heard from Steven Sheriff yet, but I think his silence currently is speaking very loudly. And if he does have evidence to provide to contradict all the accusations against him, he has to present those sooner rather than later, because right now, Steven Sheriff looks, I mean, like one of the most evil people to have ever touched the gaming industry. But that's my take. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.
Well, there's other pretty bad ones too as well.
And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys.
That's crazy though. Honestly, that's pretty wild. Hey, Justin. Honestly, like I said specifically, man. Oh, dude. Cinema, man. Cinema. You love to see it when you've been playing video games for such a long time, you know, you can kind of weed them out or so you can see, you know, which ones are the ones that kind of are a scam, you know, just saying. But yeah, overall, that's pretty much it. It's kind of crazy to see this. Pretty fucking, I'm not gonna lie, this shit's fucking funny, to be honest. This shit is fucking hilarious. Hey man, they alerted this shit back in 2017 that there was some suspiciousness about the game itself, but I guess nobody caught on to it. I guess nobody knew. I guess nobody knew at the end of the day. Let me see. Hold up a second. Let me see. How do I do the oldest? Can I do the oldest by any chance? Oh, no. Let's not do that. Let's go to maybe popularity question mark? No. This year? No, I don't know how to fucking use this shit, to be honest. I was trying to see if there was like any like old videos or so talking about like Ashes of Creations back then. But hey, you know what? All I gotta say is, well, nah, I really don't got nothing to say. This. I was gonna say, you know, told you so, but like at the end of the day, it's just kind of like, well, they've had articles and stuff like that about this game in general back in the past. So, you know, like I said, a lot of susness at the end of the day. So, oh man. You love to see that. I ain't gonna lie, you love to see that. Hey man, all I gotta say is you just gotta pay attention to some of the red signs at the end of the day so you don't get scammed. This is why you always gotta watch out, man.